In this video I want to talk about how we install the engine mount of our AeroMomentum AM15 engine on our Zenith CH750 CruZer home-built aircraft. Even though I'm specifically talking about our installation, the general procedure should also be very similar on other types of experimental aircraft. Before we could start working on the actual engine mount, we had to drill the holes into the brackets on the cockpit side. We clamped it against the firewall, making sure that the brackets would not extend beyond the sidewall of the fuselage, as this would leave bumps in the glare shield. On the engine mount side, the holes were already pre-drilled by Zenith, so we used them to mark the position of the holes in the brackets, and then drill them first with a number 40 drill, later number 30, which was still a little bit smaller than the holes or the pre-drilled holes in the firewall, and then enlarging them to the proper size using a Dremel tool, as the position of the holes was slightly off. We also drilled the holes through the longerons into the brackets. I believe the size for those was AN3. We didn't want to use our new AN bolts for the temporary installation of the engine mount brackets, and therefore used simple number 10 bolts from the hardware store. The holes through the stiffener and the firewall that we had enlarged with a Dremel tool also came out nice. They are not perfectly round, but good enough for now, since we will later have to enlarge them with the actual drill bit for the engine mount anyways. We then clamped the engine mount in place and aligned it with a triangle, using the holes in the firewall as a reference. We also wanted to keep a bit of a distance between the lower brackets of the engine mount and the bottom skin of the fuselage, and therefore inserted 2 thick pieces of aluminum as spacers. In that position, the upper brackets of the engine mount, however, slightly collided with the stiffener on the firewall. We therefore marked about 1 mm to be cut off, and also decided to round off the upper edge of the brackets so that they would better conform to the stiffener on the firewall. Since 2 bolts had to go through the upper engine mount bracket and its matching counterpart on the cockpit side, we measured the distance from a given hole in the firewall to the upper edge of the bracket, and then repeated the same measurement on the cockpit side, measuring the distance from the same hole to the upper edge of the bracket that was welded to the cabin frame. Turned out that the bracket on the engine mount sat a little bit higher than the one on the cockpit side. To identify where we had to drill the hole, we therefore marked the overlapping area. We then marked the center of the overlapping areas, as this is where we originally wanted to drill the holes. It then, however, turned out that this would cause issues with tool access on the engine mount side. We therefore used a socket and put it as close to the tubes of the engine mount, and measure the diameter of the socket as well as the distance from the edges to that socket, and the distances plus half of the diameter of the socket would then tell us exactly where we would have to drill the holes. In our case, the upper bracket of the engine mount was a little bit crooked. We therefore made the holes in that bracket parallel to the stiffener on the firewall and not the edge of the bracket. After carefully marking and center punching the positions of the holes, we drilled them with a number 40 bit. And since we were drilling into stainless steel, we also made sure that everything was well lubricated and that we drill them at the slowest possible speed. When the engine mount was still clamped in place, we took that as an opportunity to also mark the position in which the holes had to be drilled through the lower brackets of the engine mount. We did that by starting to drill with a number 30 bit through the holes that we had already drilled through the firewall. We only briefly started drilling so that a mark would be clearly visible in the areas that we had previously painted black with a Sharpie. And then after removing the engine mount, we first drilled a hole with number 40, and then after that with a number 30 bit. Once we had all the holes pre-drilled, we secure the engine mount back in place, making sure that it is properly aligned. As we then progressed to enlarge the holes, we put drill bits of the current hole size through them to make sure that the engine mount or that the brackets wouldn't move anymore. And then once we had reached the final hole size, we used standard bolts to temporarily secure the engine mount in place. As a final step, all that was left to do was to deburr and smoothen the edges of the engine mount brackets, and it was ready to be installed once the fuselage was riveted together and painted.